So, you've read the title. The title for today's episode is My Experience with the Manosphere. Now, this is going to be an episode that I am redoing, but I definitely have to go do it again. So, a few things I want to say before I go to get it started. We're going to be talking about the Manosphere today, obviously, my experience, but we're going to be talking about the concerns that I see a lot of people have, and I just think it's right to talk about this in my personal experience. In today's climate, I think it would be an interesting topic. So, that is what we're going to be talking about today. If you do not know who I am, my name is Champ, and I help men build their foundation of masculinity. And the ways in which I do that is I talk about certain things that are of my interest that can definitely help out not only just me, but anyone else who's willing to accept the help. Um, yeah, so let's get into it, man. So I was introduced to the Manosphere when I was about 16, 17 years old. This is around the end of 2018, early 2019, and the reason why I had gotten into this type of content, right? And I feel like everybody kind of has their own perspective of the manosphere, but essentially I wanted to learn more about relationships, right? Dating and relationships were always of one of my biggest interests just because my parents' relationship didn't work out and I wanted to figure out m- the specifics in a relationship if I wanted to ensure that I could have a good quality relationship that I would need to figure out the problems in which most relationships have. The obviously understanding thoroughly the most common problems. That was just like my own, essentially my own perspective that I thought would be very very interesting. And I came across a bunch of men giving advice on a lot of different topics, right? And yeah, essentially I was really just looking I was just looking to learn. I was just looking to learn from men who've done it before, and that is exactly what it is, right? So if you don't know what the manosphere is, I'm going to give you somewhat of a definition that you can hopefully use or hopefully, understand, help with your understanding. So what is the manosphere? The manosphere is essentially a community of men, right? In many different aspects and many on many different platforms. It essentially is the root foundation of men helping men, right? So before I even came onto the scene, and this, like I said, this is about 6 or 7 years ago, it had already existed and was already, I'd say, still probably in its beginning stages. One of the first, so I've obviously have heard about it for years and years, but one of the first things that I hear a lot of people talk about who have also been involved in the Manosphere for such a long time. They talk about certain Reddit forums. If you don't know what Reddit forum is, essentially is Reddit's like an app where you have communities that can have conversations based off of a question or based off of a comment, and um, essentially it was just men helping men out, right? Men, especially young men, are having a lot of struggles and have always had a lot of struggles, and it was almost like having a big brother online, and that is pretty much the concept in theory of the manosphere. It is what the manosphere is, and it is what the manosphere will always be, is men helping men. And I feel like with certain creators' messages, it can truly get lost in translation, and that is what I'm here to really bring light to because I think it is very, very important, right? I believe the manosphere gives hope to the hopeless, it gives strength to the weak, it gives a voice to those who don't feel like they're heard, and that's exactly what it is, right? I It could be men of all ages realistically, but the most active members are probably going to be in the teens, 20s, and 30s for sure. And one of the things that I think is interesting about the manosphere is obviously with anything there is good and there is bad, and trust me, it's not like I'm completely oblivious to all the bad that the manosphere has to provide, right? Me personally, I'm going to tell you about the time that I fell into one of the traps of the manosphere. One of the traps of the manosphere I believe to be is essentially the concept of removing critical thinking. So many men, they fall into this trap because men are logical and we want a logical explanation for the things that happen in this life. We want a reason for certain things. And by giving yourself a reason or by giving yourself essentially a structure of a foundational understanding, it can, in theory, it would help you navigate the world a lot better because at least you have some type of foundation, right? But with this foundation, when you remove the critical thinking, right? And of course, the reason why you would even do this in the first place is because you believe that people that have came before you actually know exactly what they're talking about, which for the most part, I would say they have a pretty good grasp of what they're talking about because they probably thought about it longer than you, right? But at the end of the day, removing critical thinking and not being able to understand life's nuances that exist was definitely a trap that I fell into. And I'll go ahead and give you my perspective. So, like I said, about 2018, 2019, I want to say it was just around that time. I was in a relationship in high school. It was like my first serious relationship that I've had, and I was just trying my best to learn about women. I was trying my best to learn about relationships. I was trying my best to learn about a lot of different things. And of course, my method of going, my method of learning about these things wasn't necessarily the most practical um, way to go about that, right? Obviously, I was listening to the Manosphere. Oh, women are like this. They do these certain things. They like these certain things. I was essentially just getting overly consumed and, like I had mentioned, removing my critical thinking from understanding women, right? All I was truly searching for, I guess, without really being intentional, was a foundation of understanding. And like I said, that is what really trips up a lot of men. Is first, a lot of men don't necessarily have the structure to understand life and understand why the things are the way that they are, right? So they seek it through many different ways. Like I said, mine was just simply through the manosphere. So now I had and was building upon my foundational understanding of women, my foundational understanding of relationships, my foundational understanding of being a man. There's a lot of different things, right? But when I had removed the critical thinking, and I had essentially, by removing the critical thinking and adopting this philosophy, I'll call it a philosophy of the manosphere, it essentially doesn't take into account life's nuances. And I think this is probably one of the biggest things that most people never talk about, is the fact that life is just so nuanced. It's very, very hard to use generalizations without running into certain situations where people will point out the obvious exception to the rule. And of course, exception to the rule, right? The rule being the generalization and the exception being the exception, right? The obvious situation where that doesn't necessarily occur. I feel like there's so many men that they constantly run into this problem because when you have a foundational understanding and you go ahead and try to apply that through life, in my case, with my relationship, right? I said that women, or I had learned that women are this specific where they had these specific tendencies according to the manosphere. I tried to apply that on my relationship and I found out, and it only took from years and years of thinking after that, essentially I wasn't necessarily treating her as the way in which she is or she was, right? I was treating her the ways in which I was assuming that she was, which obviously was an incorrect assumption because I didn't take into account the fact that there could have been a nuance. There could be the exception to the rule, and that obviously is going to destroy anything, right? If you have a foundational understanding of something and you try to apply it in a situation where it doesn't necessarily apply because, like I said, life is nuanced, then you're going to run into situations where you're not going to know how to handle the situation because essentially the advice that you were prescribed that you now apply doesn't apply to the situation that you're trying to apply it at because life's nuanced, like I mentioned. So I feel like that was a huge, huge part of one of the traps of the manosphere. And yeah, I just see it all too often that a lot of people, they use generalizations to justify certain things. And like I said, some of the time I would say they are decently accurate. Some of the generalizations that they have are decently accurate. And essentially, like I mentioned, right, you're just trying your best to have somewhat of a structure. That's it. That's all it really comes down to. And of course, if you're a parent watching this, of course, this is a reasonable fear that you should have when it comes to your children, right? You don't want them to be overly influenced by creators or, yeah, I would say creators of the manosphere that are essentially giving you or giving your child a life prescription that doesn't necessarily apply to the life that they're living potentially. And Now there are plenty of good creators, and I would definitely seek some out if you don't know any already, right? But I just believe that obviously there's good creators, obviously there's bad creators, but the bad creators, I feel like at the end of the day, their advice, it has good intent, right? I really believe that a lot of even the people that are not as good, even the people that are what people could be receiving as bad, right? I believe that a lot of their intention is good. They have good intent, but I just believe it gets lost in translation by the ego of the creator, right? The ego of the creator will say a certain thing or try to act a certain way to get a reaction, right? Or they'll say a certain thing to try to create up a perception for the audience, right? And I feel like that is where the manosphere truly starts to begin to break down, right? When you get away from the actual pure advice, and then you start bringing in unnecessary personality, unnecessary comments, and then just trying to give out a life prescription that isn't necessarily going to be within the best interest of the people that are watching, right? So I just feel like there are some good creators out there. I'll give you an example of one of the creators that I see giving out what I deem to be decent advice, but the way the execution is just completely off, right? So I'll give you an example. So if you don't know who this guy is, one of the biggest Manosphere podcasts are it is a podcast that is called the Fresh and Fit podcast. If you've never heard of this podcast, I would recommend that you watch, and just like with anything, you take with what you can and you leave the rest. That's what I expect you to do with this as well. But essentially, the host of the podcast, his name is Myron. He's a very, very controversial figure. He loves this debate. He loves this chatter. He loves the arguments. He loves all of it. So one of the pieces of advice that I believe that he has true good intent, but the execution is pretty awful, is he says that all men should sleep around with 50 women to ensure that they have experience and that they will not get taken advantage by women. So essentially, the intent is the intent of the advice is to give understanding to the men that get taken advantage of, right? If you're a man and you don't necessarily know what you're doing with women, odds is women are going to take advantage of you. I would say more often than not, in some type of way, they're gonna essentially they're gonna essentially put you in a position where you could get used for your time, your attention, your energy, your resources, your money, whatever. You can get used essentially, right? So the host of the podcast understands this. He's talked to way more men than I've ever talked to, right? He understands that men have this problem, and his prescription is that if you sleep around with 50 women, there's going to be a lot less occasions where women are going to be able to take advantage of you, because you're going to be more well versed on women than you would be if you didn't sleep with those 50 women. So that is his claim, right? What I personally believe, do you need to sleep with 50 women to understand women? Of course not, right? But you must understand the nuance in his message. The nuance in his message is essentially the concept of, if you wish to not be taken advantage by women, and you understand that you need more experience with women, it's probably best to get experience with women. So therefore, when you have the experience, there's going to be less occasions in which you're going to get taken advantage of. That's essentially his message. But people will hear sleep with 50 women, and then they'll just basically shut off from there, right? The advice, the intent, all of it just goes away. And that's why I'm here to essentially inform you on the nuance of some of these things, right? Some of the reasons in which I see people acting a certain way or suggesting a certain thing. And I just think that's absolutely interesting. Like I said, if you understand, or if you've heard or listened to the Fresh and Fit podcast, or maybe you have another piece of advice that you think gets lost in translation by a certain creator, I want you to let me know in the comments. I would appreciate it very, very much. But yeah, I do want to mention that as well. Like I said, I want to reiterate the point that a lot of the creators have good messaging, or they have good intent, but their message can get lost in translation by the ego of the person that is purporting the message. So I'll give you some of the things that I see. So I see people trying to, at least nowadays, and of course this was literally created by Andrew Tate. Essentially, people trying their best to be as controversial as they possibly can, and just to take a side, just to create an argument, just to have some type of conversation, right? So understand that there's going to be those people that are going to be in the manosphere. They're going to automatically exist, and like I had mentioned, there's also going to be the men that just want to create a certain image. They want to create a certain persona about them that people will recognize and see them as. So therefore, they will try their best to curate a persona. So with understanding that, and like I said, I do believe you need to understand that going into the manosphere, because if you don't, then of course you're going to fall into a lot more traps of the manosphere that aren't necessary. I'll say that for sure. So I'm going to give you some more information about the manosphere. I'm going to give you some vocabulary words that I see that are used all too often, and if you do decide to, or maybe you are a person that watches it, right? If you do decide to watch it, at least you'll be able to be a little bit more informed and be able to understand the philosophy, like I had mentioned, because I think it's very, very, it's somewhat essential to the to watching. So I'll say that. So I'll start off with the first one, the dating marketplace. You'll hear this all too often. Essentially, what it is the dating marketplace is just everything, anything and everything that is dating, right? That is the dating marketplace. So let's just say, for example, Instagram. There's a dating marketplace on Instagram. On dating apps, there's a dating marketplace. In public, I guess that is a dating marketplace. Essentially, it is single people in an environment, whether it's a physical environment or whether it's a digital environment. It's essentially just the dating marketplace, right? Next one is going to be SMV, sexual market value. Essentially it's like this. Sexual market value, if I had to describe, is essentially the concept of how good looking a person, or not even how good looking, how sexual market value. How would I describe it? It is going to be the perception that people have of the person, right? So I'll give you an example, right? Let's just say a woman, on a scale of 1 to 10, she looks like a 9 out of 10. She's absolutely gorgeous. Her sexual market value is going to be very, very high. So therefore, she's going to get a lot of attention. She's going to be able to talk to pretty much all the type of men that she would like to talk to, right? Or let's just say a woman who's a 3 out of 10. She has a low, very, very low sexual market value. Yes, she could probably still sleep around with men, but she's not going to get the pick of her choice that she wants. So there's that, right? And obviously, kind of goes hand in hand with men. Sexual market value for a high status man, he's obviously going to have all the women available to him because, of course, women don't want to date a lame. And if you're a low status man, then your sexual market value isn't that high. And then what they will also encourage in the manosphere is to increase your sexual market value, whether that's your looks, whether that's your finances, whether that's fulfilling your purpose, whether that's many different things, essentially, right? Another very, very important term that I think is used very, very often. It's not used as much anymore, but essentially the concept is the red pill versus the blue pill. If you've ever seen The Matrix, it is essentially like that, right? A blue pill is essentially your choice of choosing the naivety that is the reality of life. The red pill is understanding the truths, right? Understanding the truths about women, understanding the truths about the life of a man, understanding the truths of just life in general that are very, very hard to hear, but quite frankly are absolutely necessary in order to navigate this life the best way possible, right? The red pill is essentially the people who I would say, okay, if you're red pilled, essentially you're going to recognize that society's programming, which if it's not very, very hard to tell, but essentially society's programming is purporting a certain message. So I'll give you an example. The man and the woman. Let's just say it's like a movie or something, right? The man being the bumbling idiot and the woman being the strong or the smart one in the relationship, right? That is societal programming. The red pill essentially understands that there are certain things that are trying to make the minds of men weak, and you must do whatever it is to go ahead and void them. Because if you choose to believe in this delusion that is societal programming, you're going to fall into the blue pill. The blue pill is essentially living life with a blindfold on, not being willing to hear out the truths that do exist, and to essentially say, "Oh, I see the sky. People say it's green. It looks blue to me, but I'm gonna say it's green." Right? Red pill is obviously the complete opposite. Red pill is, hey, they're telling you it's green. It's obviously blue. You know it's blue. So stop acting like it's not blue. So essentially, that can give you somewhat of a foundation. But yeah, essentially, in this concept, red pill people do better with women. Blue pill are the ones that are going to get taken advantage of, like I had mentioned earlier. And we'll get into the next one. These are going to be a little bit. They're going to be a little less um, common, right? You got the purple pill and the black pill, right? The purple pill is essentially it's a mix of obviously the blue and the red, right? So a lot of the people in the red pill, they wouldn't even recommend a relationship. This is where it truly lost me, right? Red pill is essentially understanding that women are certain ways, men are certain ways, right? Men are okay. I'll give you a philosophy. This is one of the red pill philosophies, the Manosphere philosophies, whatever. Essentially, men are naturally polygamists, and women are obviously monogamous, right? That's like one of the things that they say. Purple pill essentially is going to be a man who has the understandings of the red pill, but still chooses to live a blue pill life, which is essentially, being in a relationship and things like that. So, yeah. Black pill, this is where it really, really gets dark. This is where you don't want your kid to fall into. This is where you don't want your fellow man to fall into, but yet you're going to see it all too often, and this is just what it is, right? This is what I believe to be the most toxic environment for men, the most toxic environment in the manosphere. This is the black pill. The black pill is essentially, and I'll give you another term, MGTOW, MG, whatever, MGTOW, MGTOW, men going their own way, right? Essentially, this philosophy that these people have is essentially, if let's just say, for example, I look like a 4 out of 10, there's nothing that I can really do besides hate the world, hate women for wanting men that are better than me, and just hate my life because, quite frankly, I'm not living for anything. I don't get to enjoy certain things that other people get to enjoy in this life, right? So essentially, you take the black pill. It basically removes you from society. It removes you from having interactions with women. It removes you from so many other things. And yes, men do it because, quite frankly, they feel like they have no other option. Yes, they feel like they have no other option. That's just what it is. Basically, I would say these motherfuckers are just lazy, in my opinion. In my opinion, they're just lazy. They don't want to work on themselves. They don't want to work on their looks. They don't want to work on their charisma. They don't want to work on any of the things that are going to bring them actual value in this life. They're just victims, essentially. They're the victims in the community of the manosphere. They're just, the world's against me. Why are the things the way that they are, instead of just trying to work with them, right? Getting into the next one, another term that you'll hear all too often as well, spinning plates. Essentially, this concept is, so let's just say for me, for example, let's just say I was spinning plates. That means I'm talking to multiple women at the same time, right? Or if a woman's spinning plates for whatever reason, she's talking to multiple men at the same time. That's essentially what it is. And then you got the alpha and the beta. These are going to be all less. These are kind of a little bit more washed out, but essentially, the alpha being the red pill philosophy, the beta being the blue pill. Yeah, I'll say that for sure. Essentially, let me see if there's any more that I want to mention. We'll go down in this route. Let's just go body count. If you've never heard of this, body count is essentially just the amount of people that you've slept with. So, like, let's just say, for example, there's a woman. She's 18. She has a body count of 20. She slept with 20 people, right? Obviously, in my opinion, that'd be a very, very high body count for anybody that's 18, let alone a woman, specifically a woman. That's like a ridiculously high body count. Or let's just say a man who has a body count of 1. That means he just slept with one woman, and that's it, right? So there's certain things like that. There's gonna be plenty of other let's just say vocabulary words that are commonly used in the manosphere. I just can't, for whatever reason, think of any. And if there is some that I have missed, feel free to leave it in the comments. I would definitely appreciate the input of information. It'll definitely help out somebody. So, getting into it, what it comes down to it is this, right? So let's just say you're a parent that is worried about their son or their nephew or their cousin falling into the traps of the manosphere, right? Understand that there are plenty of good creators and good messages that are truly undeniable, right? I can give you some of the things that I've personally learned, and I do believe that are, of course, there's you got to take the good with the bad for sure. This is a double-edged sword. This is just what it is, right? This is in order to find anything good, you're gonna have to go through the bad to find the good. That's what it is. And at the end of the day, if you want to avoid your kid from falling into the black pill or falling into the negative aspects of the manosphere, essentially the woman hating or the misogynist, whatever perspectives. Essentially, what it comes down to is this, right? If the consumer has a very conscious and curative, essentially, view of life, right, that is properly calibrated with the right values and morals, then of course they're going to be able to handle something like the manosphere. So what it comes down to is this: is if you're seeing somebody in your if you're seeing a young man in your life that is very very impressionable, as long as he has the correct morals and values, he should be able to handle himself in that environment of the manosphere. You shouldn't necessarily have to worry about him because he should naturally be drawn to the good things and naturally drawn away from the bad things. And for me personally, I can only speak on my experience, of course. Going into the manosphere, I was not necessarily equipped with the proper morals and values, and it's something that I had to truly develop myself. And of course, through a conscious and curative process, you start to weed out the bad and you start to say, okay, this is good, this is bad, this is bad. I don't want to listen to that. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to internalize it. This is good. This is what I'm going to be focusing on because that is good, right? So, essentially, at the end of the day, I would like to say this. The manosphere has truly changed my life. It has truly changed my life for the better. I have a lot more foundational understanding of a lot of the things that I deem to be absolutely essential as a man, right? Understanding simple philosophies of Stoicism, if you don't know what that is essentially, if I had to just describe it real quick, essentially is it's approaching life, understanding that life's going to have its ups and downs, but you must remain somewhat calm, somewhat still, somewhat even, right? When it comes to life, because there's always going to be highs and there's always going to be lows. Essentially maintaining. I'm not going to say emotionless, but essentially that's kind of what it is. Just essentially not letting your ship be guided by the life's winds, right? Essentially that's what it is. Also understanding discipline, understanding perseverance, and truly having a firmer grasp of the understanding of what it takes to be a masculine man. Those are all the things that the manosphere has truly helped me internalize, along with being way more inclined to tell the truth, right? Being way more inclined to want to go ahead and protect and provide for my loved ones, right? That's obviously another thing that I think that I've learned, or not think that I've learned, I know that I've instilled. And along with that, essentially the good things of being a man, right? Like I said, it is very, very easy for most people to get lost. And like I had mentioned, especially somebody's message getting lost in translation because of their ego. But at the end of the day, the manosphere is truly good. The manosphere is controversial, is going to have its ups and its downs. But at the end of the day, it's always going to be alluring. And everybody's interested in, I'm not going to say everybody. A lot of people are interested in hearing the locker room talk. That's what it is at the end of the day. It's just locker room talk. It's advice that you're getting from Big Bro. That's just what it is. That's the environment. That's the people that are in it. And once you have that firm understanding of that's exactly what it is, it'll definitely help you navigate. And you should run into a lot less problems, right? So, yes, there are definitely traps in the manosphere. It is up to you to be able to raise. It is up to you to be able to have the morals and values that are going to be of good character, that are going to naturally steer you away from the bad, and of course draw you in to the good, right? It's very, very conscious. You need to be very, very conscious and curative within this journey, and if you are, the manosphere can do a lot of good for you, right? The manosphere is going to do a lot of bad for the people who are already going down the wrong path, in my opinion. If you don't have the right morals and values, you are going down the wrong path. So, essentially with anything, right? If you have the right if you have the right intent, if you have the right morals and values, it doesn't even matter what you choose in this life. It's going to end up good. And if you're removed from those, or if you've never had them, then of course you're going to fall into the temptation of the badness of life. And that's just what it comes down to. So there are good creators, there are plenty of bad creators as well. Obviously, you don't want to watch the bad. Obviously, you want to pay attention to the good. And like I had mentioned, and before I leave it off, understand the nuance within the advice that's being given. Understand that there's a foundational message that's trying to get across. And if you're not able to distinguish that, you're going to be the same type of people who are going to be looking at 30-second or a minute clip and saying, "Oh, this is the person, and this is their entire personality, and this is their entire life philosophy," when it potentially couldn't be, right? So you need to be mindful of all those things, right? If you're judging the Manosphere, just know that you could be incorrectly judging it just based off of your lack of understanding or lack of wanting to spend the time to watch the content, right? I'm sure you can find plenty of people where it's helped them. I'm sure you can find plenty of people where it's definitely hurt them. But at the end of the day, advice is advice. And be very, very careful who you receive advice from. That should always be the thing to keep in mind. I'll say that. But that's all I have to say for today's episode. This was episode 230 of the Life of a Champ podcast, talking about my experience with the Manosphere. I'll be doing more episodes on this upcoming, so if you enjoyed this one, tap in with the next one. I'm going to be describing what I believe to be the biggest problems of why the Manosphere even exists in the first place. So if you're interested in that, tap in with the next podcast on Thursday. Also, tap into the live stream that I'm going to be having on Monday. I'll be doing a tier list video, or I'll be doing a reaction video, one or the other. If there's a specific video or creator that I'm going to go to react to, make sure you go ahead and let me know as well. And also, if there's a certain type of tier list that you would like me to make, feel free to leave in the comments as well. But other than that, I'll leave you guys off with the podcast motto. Fellas, out here, man, we don't just work around here, man. We outwork. So make sure y'all work with these motherfuckers, because you know that I am, and you know that everyone else around me is, man, and it just has to be like that. So that's all I have to say for today's episode. Make sure you follow me on Twitch, TikTok, Rumble, and on Spotify at Life of a Champ podcast. And y'all have a good rest of your night. Tap with the next podcast on Thursday.